It all started when Brian became just a little quieter than usual. He stopped cracking jokes, barely argued with Stewie, and didn't complain about anything. At first, the family thought he was just tired, but within a couple of days, they noticed Brian's breathing had changed. Deep, slow, almost like something inside him was shifting. Peter joked it was allergies, but Lois was the first to see the muscles on Brian's back twitch, as if something under his fur was growing. That night, Brian paced around the house for hours, and every step he took sounded heavier, like he'd somehow become bigger. When Peter turned on the lights, Brian slipped into the shadows as if trying to hide. And the next morning, everyone noticed he actually was taller. Not by much, but enough to make everyone uncomfortable. On the third day, Meg disappeared. Peter walked through the whole house calling her name, but there was no answer. Brian just sat in the kitchen corner, staring at Peter without blinking, as if he knew more than he wanted to admit. Peter asked, "Brian, did you see where Meg went?" Brian slowly turned his head away. On the fourth day, Chris vanished too. His door was open, his bed messy, and his window lifted just slightly. When Peter approached Brian again, the dog didn't even look up. He just let out a long, deep breath. And in that moment, Peter thought Brian's shoulders looked broader, his claws just a little longer than before. On the fifth day, Lois never came down for breakfast. Peter searched every room in panic, calling her name, checking closets, looking outside. Nothing. The house felt too still, too empty, like something underneath it was breathing. He rushed to Brian, yelling, "Where's Lois? What's happening? Why won't you say anything?" But Brian only lifted his eyes that had grown too dark, too deep, reflecting something feral and enormous. By now, Brian took up almost half the kitchen. His chest rose and fell like a massive beast's, and his neck and shoulders were far too large for a normal dog. That night, Peter woke up to heavy footsteps moving slowly through the hallway. He stepped outside his room and saw a massive shadow passing the living room doorway. The shape was vaguely Brian-like, but far taller, almost reaching the ceiling. Peter wanted to call out, but in that moment he realized he was completely alone. Everyone else was gone, and every time he asked Brian about the missing family members, Brian simply stayed silent. On the final night, Peter gathered his courage and approached the living room. Brian was there, fully transformed now, enormous, broad, monstrous, his body rising and falling with slow, thunderous breaths. He sat in the center of the room, staring into the darkness like he was listening to something only he could hear. Peter stood a few feet away and whispered, "Brian, do you understand what you've done?" Brian slowly turned his head, looking straight at Peter with a gaze that had none of the old Brian left in it. The lights flickered. For a split second, the room was swallowed by darkness, and when the lamps came back on, Peter was gone. The house was silent again. Only Brian remained, massive, motionless, staring into the empty living room. And that's where the episode cut to black. It started quietly. Joe Swanson stopped showing up at the Drunken Clam. He didn't answer calls. Even Quagmire said he hadn't seen him in days. Peter joked that Joe probably got stuck to his chair again, but deep down he felt a strange, heavy unease. On the third day of Joe's disappearance, someone knocked on the Griffin door. Peter opened it and froze. Joe was standing there, on his legs, upright, balanced, as if he had always been able to walk. "Hey, Peter," Joe said softly, almost emotionlessly. Peter stepped back. "Joe, how are you? How are you standing?" Joe tilted his head slightly, like the question confused him. "I've always walked, Peter." His smile was tight, unnatural, stretched just a little too far. Peter told him to leave, but Joe calmly stepped inside the house, walking as smoothly as if gravity didn't affect him the same way it affected everyone else. He talked normally, but every line sounded rehearsed, like someone else was feeding him sentences. By nightfall, Peter was gone, The house was unnervingly silent, and in Peter's favorite armchair sat Joe, holding the TV remote as if he had been doing it for years. Lois acted like nothing was wrong. The kids didn't question it. When they said, "Dad," they were looking at Joe. Only Brian reacted, the only one who remembered Peter existed. The next day, Brian confronted him. "Where's Peter?" he demanded. Joe stared at him for an uncomfortably long time without blinking. "Peter's here," he finally said. "I'm Peter." His tone was so calm, so confident, it made Brian's stomach twist. That night, Brian heard footsteps. Not Peter's, not Joe's. Something heavier, slower, echoing in multiple parts of the house at once. He rushed to the living room. Joe was still there, sitting upright, watching the static-filled TV. But his shadow on the wall was wrong. Too tall, too stretched, too alive. On the fourth day, Brian went to the basement. He followed faint drag marks carved into the wooden floor. The air down there felt colder than it should, thick like fog you couldn't see but could feel in your lungs. In the far corner, Brian found a torn piece of a green shirt, Peter's shirt. And then he heard a weak groan, unmistakably Peter's. Brian stepped forward, but before he could follow the sound, the basement door slammed upstairs. "Peter!" he called, but the voice that answered was not Peter's. Joe was standing in the doorway, still, too still, taller than before. Or maybe the ceiling had somehow lowered. His face didn't move, but he was smiling. "You've learned too much, Brian," he said, voice almost echoing. Brian tried to run, but Joe's steps were unnaturally steady, too smooth for a man who used to rely on a wheelchair his entire life. When Joe grabbed him, Brian felt an icy, metallic grip, like the hands weren't made of flesh anymore. "I'm Peter," Joe whispered, "and I'm staying." The final shot of the episode was the Griffin living room. Lois cooked dinner as if nothing had changed. Meg and Chris watched TV, and sitting in Peter's armchair was Joe, perfectly still, perfectly composed, wearing Peter's calm expression like a mask. No sign of Brian anywhere, just his collar lying in the shadow near the couch. The episode cut to black without sound. It all started when Peter came home one afternoon, carrying a huge cardboard box, and proudly announced that he'd found the perfect new dog to keep Brian company. Brian was suspicious right away. Nobody had asked for a second dog, and Peter looked way too excited about it. When the box opened, a big dark dog stepped out. It didn't bark, didn't wag its tail, didn't act nervous or playful. It just stared at everyone with this strange, overly aware expression, like it already understood the entire house and everyone in it. Lois tried to pet it, but the dog pulled back slightly and let out a quiet rumble. Not aggressive, more like a warning. The kids said something felt off, but Peter just laughed and said the dog was shy. That first night, Brian realized something was wrong. The new dog walked around the house almost silently, but its steps were too controlled, too evenly spaced, as if it was counting them. Sometimes it stood outside bedroom doors for minutes at a time without moving. And in the dark, Brian could have sworn its eyes glimmered, even though there was no light nearby. By the third day, the family started complaining about strange scratching sounds at night, but no one could tell where they came from. Peter brushed it off, insisting the new dog was adjusting, though Brian knew that wasn't true. The dog barely ate, yet somehow got bigger every day. Its breathing at night was heavy and deep, echoing through the hallway like it was sitting right behind the walls. One evening, Chris said he saw the new dog standing in the corner of the living room, staring at the blank television screen as if it were watching something only it could see. On the fourth day, things got worse. Family members began disappearing one by one. First Meg, Peter claimed she'd gone to hang out with friends, but her phone was still on the kitchen counter. Then Chris vanished. Then Lois. The house became unnervingly silent. Brian searched every room, but there were no signs of where anyone had gone. The new dog, already enormous now, spent most of its time sitting by the basement door, guarding it like something was down there. By evening, even Peter was gone. No note, no explanation, just silence. Brian realized he was alone in a house that felt less and less like home, with only that strange dog left, watching him more openly now. He gathered his courage and walked toward the living room, determined to figure out what was happening. But as he reached the stairs, the lights suddenly went out. Heavy breathing echoed through the darkness, closer than ever. The lamps flickered once, and Brian saw it. The new dog standing in the center of the room. It was far bigger than before, impossibly big, and slowly lifted its head to look directly at him with a stare that froze him in place. Brian tried to step back, and right at that moment, the episode cut to black. The lost episode of Family Guy, Dead Air. The episode kicks off with a classic setup. The Griffin family is gathered in the living room for a night of TV, but the routine is shattered when the screen abruptly cuts to black, followed by an ear-splitting blast of white noise so intense that Brian drops his martini in shock. While Lois immediately nags Peter about unpaid cable bills, Peter reveals the stupidity behind the situation. He actually bought this television for $1 at the estate sale of a creepy old hermit who died under mysterious circumstances just last week. As the static clears, the image on the screen resolves into something deeply unsettling. It's a live feed of their own living room, but it's grainy, black and white, and shot from a high, impossible angle, like a security camera. Suddenly, the on-screen kitchen door opens, and Peter walks out. But it's not their Peter. This anti-Peter has hollow black voids for eyes, and a frozen, unnaturally wide rictus grin. The entity on the screen slowly turns its head, looking directly out of the television and locking eyes with the real family. The real Peter tries to crack a joke to break the tension, but the screen monster slowly raises a hand and points a finger directly at Meg. In that exact second, the entire house plunges into darkness. When the lights flicker back on, the spot on the couch where Meg was sitting is empty. Brian notes the air smells like ozone, and Stewie is the first to spot the horror. Meg is now trapped inside the television. She's silently pounding on the glass from the other side, trapped in a warped, pulsating nightmare version of their home. Panic sets in. Peter decides to fix things with his trademark percussive maintenance and smashes his fist onto the top of the TV set. Instead of fixing it, the machine arcs with electricity and fires a bolt of energy that zaps Chris. In a flash of light, Chris vanishes from the room and reappears on the screen next to a terrified Meg. The remaining survivors, Peter, Lois, Stewie, and Brian, retreat and barricade themselves in the kitchen. Stewie quickly deduces what's happening. The TV is a portal to a dimension of eternal suffering that feeds on the family's idiocy, and Peter is acting as its primary battery. Their strategy session is interrupted by a terrifying sound from the other side of the kitchen door. A distorted, metallic voice croaks out a glitched, giggity-giggity-goo, sounding like grinding gears. The door is ripped off its hinges, revealing a monstrosity. It's Quagmire, but transformed into a techno-horror abomination. His body is a tangled mass of rusted cables and wires, and replaced his head is an old CRT monitor broadcasting a giant, leering eye. The techno-Quagmire extends its wire tentacles toward Lois. Peter, offended that someone else is trying to grope his wife on a weeknight, grabs a toaster for self-defense. The family charges past the monster, making a break for the living room. On the main screen, they see the cartoon versions of Chris and Meg running through a labyrinth of VHS tapes, chased by the giant, black-eyed anti-Peter. Stewie barks out the plan. Brian needs to distract the Quagmire beast. Brian reluctantly starts a dry, pointless political debate with the monster, which confuses the creature just long enough for it to pause. Seizing the moment, Peter lets out a ridiculous battle cry and jams the plugged-in toaster directly into the center of the cursed TV screen. A massive explosion rocks the room. The glass shatters, and a vortex of blue energy spits Chris and Meg back onto the living room rug, covered in some kind of interdimensional ectoplasm. The techno-quagmire behind them crumbles into a pile of harmless scrap metal. The lights stabilize. The family is reunited, though the kids are clearly traumatized. Peter wraps things up with a completely nonsensical moral about the dangers of buying used electronics. The episode ends on a lingering shot of the family sitting on the couch in total silence, just staring blankly at the empty wall where the TV used to be. The camera pulls back for an exterior shot of the Griffin house. For a split second, the entire house glitches out into static noise, and the audience hears the faint, sinister laugh of the black-eyed Peter before the screen cuts to black. It all started when Brian became quieter than usual. He would sit in the corner of the living room and watch Peter talk, joke, make decisions, lead the family. Peter was always the one in charge. That was normal. But Brian had never really noticed it the way he did now. Every time Peter spoke over him, Brian's ears twitched. Every time Peter announced what everyone would do, Brian's jaw tightened. At first it was just irritation, but then something inside him began to spiral. He stopped sleeping properly. At night he wandered the house, whispering to himself, "I could be in charge. I could lead. I could be the one they listen to." Lois overheard him once in the bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror and muttering, "Why not me? Why never me?" By the third day, his fur had changed, standing up in jagged clumps as if constantly electrified. He looked larger, too. His eyes were darker, deeper. His claws scraped the wooden floor loudly now, even when he tried to walk slowly. When the family asked what was going on, he answered with a strange, calm clarity, a voice too steady to be his. "I'm finally realizing my potential." And he stared at all of them without blinking. One night, Lois woke up to a silence that didn't feel right. She reached beside her. Peter wasn't in the bed. She walked into the living room and froze. Brian was sitting in Peter's recliner, perfectly straight, perfectly confident. He turned to her and said, "He's not the head of the family anymore." Lois demanded to know where Peter was, but Brian only lifted his lips slightly, revealing sharp teeth he didn't have before. The next day, Brian began giving orders, where Lois should clean, what Meg should do, what Chris should turn on or off. His voice had a cold authority that made everyone hesitate. The house grew dimmer. Lights flickered constantly. At night, the sound of Brian's footsteps echoed through the hallway, heavy, almost too heavy, like something large was pacing the house. Stewie was the first to piece it together. He'd noticed that Brian frequently came up from the basement, quietly, as if making sure no one followed him. One afternoon, when Brian stepped away to the kitchen, Stewie slipped downstairs. In the far corner, he found Peter, bruised, exhausted, barely conscious. When he saw Stewie, he whispered, "He wants to be in charge. He took everything. He won't let me out." But before Stewie could respond, footsteps began descending the basement stairs, slow, deliberate, powerful. Brian appeared in the doorway, much larger than before, fur spiked in all directions, eyes glowing faintly with a yellowish light. He looked at Stewie, then at Peter and said quietly, "I'm the head of the family now, and you both stay here." The basement door slammed shut. The lock clicked, and the house returned to silence. The final scene was simple and wrong. The camera slowly panned across the living room. Lois, Meg, and Chris sat perfectly still, as if waiting for instructions. And in Peter's recliner sat Brian, calm, composed, breathing like a creature finally satisfied with its place. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't need to. He had already won. The episode cut to black.